Tonight, you are stepping into one of the strangest corners of the Harry Potter universe, a place where clocks whisper, years fold back upon themselves, and even the wisest witches and wizards admit they do not fully understand what they are studying. Our journey is through the unsolved mysteries of time, magic, from the hidden chambers beneath the Ministry of Magic to the impossible moments that changed the lives of Harry Potter and his friends. If you are returning for another evening of wizarding lore, settle in and let the familiar world of Hogwarts drift around you once more. And if this is your first night here, perhaps leave a quiet note below saying, Night 1, so that years from now you can remember where your own journey began. For now, allow the day's noise to fade away. The only sound that matters is the steady ticking of unseen clocks somewhere far beneath London. Deep underground, beneath the busy streets and ordinary buildings of Whitehall, there stands a chamber few witches or wizards have ever seen. It lies beyond the visitor's entrance of the Ministry of Magic, beyond the polished corridors and golden fireplaces, beyond even the offices where laws are written and enforced. The chamber belongs to the Department of Mysteries, the secretive division staffed by unspeakables, men and women whose work is considered so sensitive that they rarely discuss it even with family members. During Harry Potter's 5th year, in June of 1996, he entered this hidden department while pursuing a vision planted in his mind by Lord Voldemort. There he discovered a collection of rooms devoted to the deepest magical questions imaginable. One studied death, another studied thought, and one, perhaps the most unsettling of all, studied time itself. The room was circular, like many chambers in the Department of Mysteries, but its atmosphere differed from every other place Harry encountered that night. Hundreds of clocks filled the space, large clocks, small clocks, grandfather clocks taller than a wizard, tiny timepieces resting on shelves. Their hands moved at different speeds. Their ticking overlapped into a strange, metallic chorus that echoed from wall to wall. The sound was not loud, yet it seemed to surround every visitor completely, as though the room itself possessed a heartbeat. Rowling's description lingers on those clocks because they immediately establish a disturbing truth. In the Department of Mysteries, time was not treated as an abstract concept. It was treated as something physical, something that could be collected, observed, and experimented upon. At the center of the chamber stood an object even stranger than the clocks. Suspended in the air was a crystal bell jar. Inside that bell jar, a tiny hummingbird underwent an impossible cycle. Harry watched as the bird hatched from an egg, grew into adulthood, aged, weakened, and died. Then, moments later, it returned to its egg state and began the process again. Birth, life, death, rebirth, over and over without end. The image lasts only a short time in the narrative, yet it raises questions that have never received clear answers. The Ministry of Magic was not merely measuring time. The Ministry had apparently found ways to isolate it, manipulate it, and force living creatures to experience it differently from the rest of the world. Why were the unspeakables studying time so intensely in the first place? The official explanation never arrives. Throughout the 7 novels, the Department of Mysteries remains exactly what its name promises: mysterious. Readers learn fragments rather than complete truths. We know that unspeakables investigated love, death, thought, prophecy, and time. We know their work was considered vital enough to receive enormous resources from the ministry. Yet the actual goals of their research remain hidden. No textbook ever explains what discoveries emerged from the time room. No ministry report appears in the story. The silence feels deliberate, as though Rowling wanted the room to remain permanently half understood, a shadowy corner of the wizarding world, where knowledge stops and speculation begins. One possibility emerges directly from canon. Wizards have always feared death, from the creation of Horcruxes by Lord Voldemort to the legend of the Deathly Hallows. Magical history repeatedly returns to the desire to overcome mortality. The bell jar's hummingbird sits at the crossroads of those themes. If time can be accelerated, reversed, isolated, or looped, then perhaps death itself becomes less permanent than ordinary people believe. The unspeakables may have hoped to understand whether aging and mortality were fundamentally linked to time's flow. Such a goal would explain why the Department of Mysteries contained both the time room and the infamous death chamber, separated by only a few corridors. Time and death seem connected throughout the series, yet no character ever fully explains how. The events of June 1996 left the room devastated when Harry, Neville Longbottom, Hermione Granger, Ron Weasley, Ginny Weasley, and Luna Lovegood fought the Death Eaters. Spells flew wildly through the Department of Mysteries. Shelves shattered, magical artifacts exploded. Time turners were destroyed. At one point, Neville's wand interacted unpredictably with objects inside the time room, and Death Eaters found themselves caught amid dangerous magical effects they scarcely understood. The battle transformed a place of careful research into a scene of chaos. Yet even in destruction, the room revealed something important. Time magic appeared unstable. Unlike ordinary charms or transfiguration, it reacted unpredictably when disturbed, as though the forces contained there resisted being controlled. What exactly is time in the Harry Potter universe? The question sounds simple until you examine the evidence. Wizards can bottle memories inside pensives, but memories are not time. Prophecies can predict future possibilities, but prophecy is not time travel. Ghosts persist after death, yet they are echoes rather than temporal anomalies. The bell jar stands apart because it suggests that time behaves almost like a magical substance. The hummingbird was not imagining different ages, it physically experienced them. Its body changed. Its life cycle unfolded repeatedly before Harry's eyes. Such evidence hints that time in Rowling's world possesses structure and texture. It can be bent, accelerated, concentrated, and perhaps even stored. A popular fan theory takes this idea further. Some readers believe the time room represented only a tiny visible portion of a much larger ministry project. According to this theory, the clocks, time turners, and bell jar were merely tools used to investigate a deeper phenomenon hidden from the public. The theory remains speculation, but it emerges naturally from the evidence. After all, governments do not dedicate entire secret departments to subjects they consider trivial. If dozens of unspeakables spent careers studying temporal magic, then they almost certainly encountered mysteries far beyond what Harry witnessed during a single night. The destruction of many records and artifacts during the battle only deepens the uncertainty. Another detail often goes unnoticed. The Department of Mysteries existed long before Harry Potter's birth. By the late 20th century, it was already a deeply established institution within the ministry. That means generations of unspeakables had investigated time across decades, perhaps centuries. Imagine the accumulated knowledge hidden in those chambers. Imagine forgotten experiments conducted during the 19th century, or discoveries made during the era of the Goblin Rebellions, or observations recorded before Albus Dumbledore himself was born. The books never reveal such histories. Yet their absence creates one of the most fascinating mysteries in the entire wizarding world. We see only the tip of an enormous mountain. The more closely you examine the time room, the stranger it becomes. The clocks imply measurement. The bell jar implies manipulation. The presence of time turners implies practical application. Together they form a picture of a branch of magic unlike any other taught at Hogwarts. Students learn charms, transfiguration, herbology, and potions through textbooks and exams. Time magic appears different. It is hidden, restricted, guarded by specialists who rarely speak about their work. Even among magical disciplines, it occupies a category of its own. And so before we ever reach Hermione Granger's famous time turner or Harry Potter's impossible encounter with his own Patronus, we begin here, in a circular room filled with clocks. The air is cool, the shelves stretch into shadows. Brass hands creep steadily across ancient faces. Somewhere inside a crystal bell jar, a tiny creature grows old, dies, and is born again. Around it stand mysteries that survived the rise of Voldemort, the fall of Voldemort, and the long centuries before either event. The clocks continue ticking. They always have. They always will. And the first great question of time magic waits quietly in the darkness. If the ministry spent centuries studying time, what exactly did it discover that it never wanted the rest of the wizarding world to know? Why would the Ministry of Magic create an object capable of tampering with time if even its own experts considered time one of the most dangerous forces in existence? The question leads us away from the shattered shelves of the Department of Mysteries and toward one of the most famous magical objects in the entire series, the Time Turner, used by Hermione Granger during her third year at Hogwarts. Unlike many legendary artifacts, the Time Turner appears deceptively simple. It is a small golden hourglass suspended on a delicate chain. Yet hidden inside that modest design is power so extraordinary that entire ministry departments were tasked with regulating it. The fact that such an object could be entrusted to a 13-year-old student remains one of the most astonishing decisions in wizarding history. The story begins in September 1993 when Hermione returned to Hogwarts for her third year. That year she enrolled in an unusually large number of subjects. Alongside her core classes, she signed up for arithmancy, ancient runes, care of magical creatures, divination, muggle studies, and several others. Very quickly, her classmates noticed something strange. Hermione seemed to appear in classes she had no time to reach. At one moment, she would be sitting beside Harry and Ron. Moments later, she would somehow already be present elsewhere. Ron Weasley repeatedly complained that her schedule made no sense. Even attentive readers were encouraged to view the situation as a mystery long before the explanation arrived. The explanation finally emerged near the end of the school year. Professor Minerva McGonagall revealed that she had petitioned the Ministry of Magic for special permission on Hermione's behalf. The Ministry approved the request and issued a time turner. Hermione then spent months secretly traveling backward several hours each day so she could attend multiple classes that occurred simultaneously. The arrangement required strict discipline. She was instructed never to reveal the object's existence, never to be seen by her past self, and never to interfere with events she had already witnessed. These rules were not casual recommendations. They reflected long-standing fears regarding the consequences of time travel. What is remarkable is not merely that Hermione possessed a time turner, but that the Ministry had an established process for granting one. McGonagall speaks about the authorization as difficult yet possible. This suggests that time turners were not unique artifacts reserved for legends or emergencies. They existed within a regulatory framework. Somewhere inside the Ministry, officials maintained records, permissions, restrictions, and oversight procedures. Someone manufactured the devices. Someone tested them. Someone determined which witches and wizards could use them. The books never identify these individuals, leaving another curious gap in the history of magical Britain. The mystery deepens when Rowling's later writings are considered. Through her additional material on wizarding history, she explained that time travel had produced numerous disasters long before Hermione ever touched a time turner. Wizards had attempted to alter past events and suffered terrible consequences. Some vanished entirely. Others aged rapidly. In several recorded cases, witches and wizards accidentally killed earlier or later versions of themselves. These stories became cautionary tales within magical society. They were serious enough that the Ministry imposed increasingly strict limitations on temporal travel, eventually restricting ordinary time turners to journeys of only a few hours. That restriction deserves attention. A few hours is an oddly specific limit. It suggests the Ministry had discovered a threshold beyond which danger increased dramatically. Hermione never traveled days into the past. She never revisited previous months. She certainly never journeyed years backward. Every trip remained relatively short. Even then, she experienced enormous stress. During her third year, she became exhausted, irritable, and overwhelmed. Her workload left her sleeping less than her classmates and constantly racing between obligations. The narrative quietly demonstrates that even successful time travel carried costs. Why not simply ban time turners altogether? The Ministry prohibited many dangerous forms of magic. Certain curses were unforgivable. Experimental magical creatures faced regulation. Illegal artifacts were routinely confiscated, yet time turners remained available under specific circumstances. The decision suggests that Ministry leaders believed the benefits outweighed the risks. A skilled witch could use a time turner for education, research, emergency response, or countless other purposes. Time magic, in other words, was dangerous in the same way dragon fire is dangerous. It required careful handling rather than complete abandonment. There is another possibility hidden beneath the official explanation. The Ministry may have viewed time turners as a practical extension of research already taking place inside the Department of Mysteries. The unspeakable studied time. The Ministry regulated time turners. The connection feels natural. Perhaps each device represented a carefully controlled application of discoveries made within the time room. If so, ordinary witches and wizards were using only a tiny fraction of knowledge possessed by the unspeakables. What remained locked behind ministry doors could have been vastly more powerful than the golden hourglass Hermione carried beneath her robes. The design of the time turner itself raises questions. Unlike a wand, it requires no incantation. Unlike a broomstick, it possesses no obvious propulsion mechanism. The user simply turns the hourglass and moves backward through time. The simplicity is almost unsettling. Great magical achievements in the series often involve elaborate rituals, rare ingredients, or immense skill. Creating a Horcrux requires murder, brewing polyjuice. Potion demands weeks of preparation. Yet a time turner compresses an extraordinary ability into a wearable object small enough to fit in a pocket. Such elegance suggests a deep mastery of magical principles that readers never fully glimpse. One detail often disappears beneath the excitement of time travel adventures. Hermione was trusted with the device because she was Hermione Granger. McGonagall knew her character. She knew Hermione respected rules, valued responsibility, and took academic obligations seriously. Had Fred and George Weasley requested a time turner for educational purposes, the ministry's response might have been very different. This trust reflects an important aspect of wizarding culture. Powerful magic is frequently regulated through judgments about character rather than purely through technical safeguards. Adults believed Hermione would obey instructions. For the most part, she did. Yet even Hermione eventually stretched those instructions. Near the end of the school year, circumstances forced her to reveal the time turner's existence to Harry Potter. Sirius Black had been condemned without trial. Buckbeak the Hippogriff faced execution. Professor Dumbledore offered a cryptic hint that more than one innocent life could be saved. At that moment, a device originally intended to solve scheduling conflicts became something far more significant. The Ministry had created an instrument capable of bending time. Soon, that instrument would become the center of one of the most famous temporal mysteries in wizarding history. Before that night arrives, however, another question lingers. The Ministry regulated time turners. It issued them selectively. It surrounded them with warnings. It documented disasters caused by their misuse. All of this suggests a long and complicated history stretching back through generations of magical government. Yet nowhere in the books do we learn who first invented the devices. No famous wizard receives credit. No date is recorded. No origin story survives. The creators of one of the most extraordinary magical inventions ever conceived remain anonymous, hidden behind the same veil of secrecy that surrounds so much of time magic itself. If the timeline in Harry Potter is fixed and cannot truly be changed, then why do the people inside that timeline still feel as though they are making choices? This question sits at the heart of the most famous time travel sequence in the entire series. It emerges from the events of June 6th, 1994, the night Sirius Black escaped capture, Buckbeak avoided execution, and Harry Potter encountered a mystery that would follow him for years. Everything that happened that evening appears simple on the surface, yet the deeper you examine it, the stranger it becomes. Cause and effect begin circling one another like two mirrors facing each other, reflecting endlessly into the distance. The chain of events began near sunset, outside Hagrid's cabin. Earlier that day, the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures had upheld Buckbeak's death sentence. Cornelius Fudge, then Minister for Magic, arrived at Hogwarts alongside Albus Dumbledore, Walden McNair, and several ministry officials to oversee the execution. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were visiting Hagrid when the group approached. Hidden beneath Harry's invisibility cloak, the three students escaped before being discovered. Moments later, they heard the unmistakable sound of an axe striking something. Everyone present assumed Buckbeak had been executed. Yet Buckbeak had not been executed at all. Unknown to Harry at the time, the Hippogriff had already been rescued by a future version of himself and Hermione. The axe had struck a fence post. In frustration, after Walden McNair realized the creature was gone. This revelation appears near the end of the novel and completely transforms the meaning of the earlier scene. What seemed like a straightforward event was actually the result of actions that had not yet occurred from Harry's perspective. The effect arrived before its cause. The same pattern appears again and again throughout that night. While Harry and Hermione waited near Hagrid's cabin after traveling backward 3 hours with the time turner, they witnessed their earlier selves moving through events they remembered experiencing. Dumbledore's instructions were explicit. They must not be seen. They must not interfere recklessly. They must allow events to unfold exactly as they already had. The mission was not to rewrite history. It was to participate in history. Every action they took had already been part of the timeline all along. One of the clearest examples involves a simple stone. Earlier in the evening, while Harry and Hermione hid near Hagrid's pumpkin patch, a stone suddenly struck the window of Hagrid's cabin. At the time, they had no idea who threw it. The interruption proved important because it distracted them and helped prevent discovery. After traveling back in time, Hermione realized the answer. She herself had thrown the stone. The mystery that puzzled her earlier was resolved not by another character, but by her future self. The event creates a perfect closed loop. The stone was thrown because Hermione remembered seeing it thrown. The books are filled with small moments like this during the time turner sequence. A rustling sound in the forest, the howl of a werewolf, the opening of a door. Apparently random events reveal hidden causes once the timeline is viewed from a different angle. Rowling carefully constructs these scenes so that nothing actually changes. Instead, readers discover that they never possessed the full picture to begin with. The timeline remains consistent from beginning to end. Harry and Hermione do not alter the past. They fulfill it. This creates a philosophical puzzle that neither the characters nor the author fully resolves. Imagine Harry deciding, after traveling back, that he simply refuses to rescue Sirius Black. Could he make that choice? The narrative strongly suggests he could not, because Sirius was already alive when Harry first experienced those events. The rescue had already happened, yet Harry never feels controlled. He acts willingly. He chooses to help. He runs across the grounds, unties Buckbeak, and follows Dumbledore's instructions because he believes it is right. The timeline appears fixed, but the people within it continue to experience freedom. Dumbledore seems unusually comfortable with this paradox. His behavior throughout the evening suggests He understands far more about time travel than he openly admits. When Harry and Hermione visit him in the hospital wing, he studies them carefully before offering his famous advice. 3 turns should do it, he says quietly, referring to the time turner. He never explains exactly what'll happen. He never tells them where to go, yet he behaves with remarkable confidence. Many readers have long suspected that Dumbledore already understood how events would unfold because he had noticed clues earlier in the evening. One such clue involves Buckbeak himself. Before Harry and Hermione travel back, Dumbledore already knows the hippogriff has disappeared. He knows McNair failed to carry out the execution. He knows something unusual has happened near Hagrid's cabin. The headmaster may not know every detail, but he clearly recognizes an opportunity. His calm demeanor contrasts sharply with the panic surrounding Sirius Black's impending kiss from the Dementors. While others see disaster approaching, Dumbledore seems to see a path through it. Time magic often rewards patience, and few characters embody patience more completely than Albus Dumbledore. The rules surrounding time turners become clearer through these events. Contrary to what many stories about time travel suggest, Harry Potter's original model does not involve branching realities or rewritten histories. There is only one timeline. Every trip into the past was already part of that timeline from the beginning. When Harry hears noises in the forest, future Harry may have caused them. When Buckbeak vanishes, future Harry and Hermione are responsible. The past cannot be overwritten because it already contains the consequences of future actions. The result feels less like editing history and more like discovering hidden layers within it. A number of readers have pointed out how unusual this approach is compared with other fantasy and science fiction stories. In many narratives, time travel creates chaos because characters alter events. In Prisoner of Azkaban, the tension comes from something different. Harry and Hermione must avoid disrupting a sequence that has already succeeded. The challenge is precision rather than transformation. Every step matters. Every delay carries risk. The story becomes a carefully choreographed dance between past and future versions of the same individuals. And yet one mystery remains waiting at the center of the night. As Harry watches events unfold near the lake, he witnesses something that should be impossible. Across the darkness appears a magnificent stag Patronus, powerful enough to repel hundreds of Dementors. Harry believes he knows exactly who cast it. He believes he has seen his father, James Potter, standing beyond the water. That assumption drives one of the most emotional moments in the entire series. But as the night continues, Harry discovers a truth even stranger than resurrection. The wizard he was waiting for never arrives. The figure he saw was someone else entirely, and understanding how that can be true opens the door to one of time magic's greatest mysteries. Where did Harry Potter's certainty come from if he only succeeded because he had already witnessed himself succeed? Few moments in the Harry Potter series reveal the strange logic of time magic more clearly than the stag Patronus beside the lake. It is a scene remembered for its emotion, for its connection to James Potter, and for the triumph of hope over despair. Yet beneath those themes lies a puzzle that has fascinated readers since 1999. The event appears simple until you ask a single question. Who cast the first Patronus? The crisis began near the edge of the forbidden forest on the night Sirius Black escaped. After following Sirius and Remus Lupin, Harry and Hermione found themselves caught in a disaster that unfolded with terrifying speed. Lupin transformed into a werewolf after clouds uncovered the full moon. Sirius, in his animagus form as a large black dog, attempted to protect Harry and Hermione. Chaos scattered everyone across the grounds. By the time Harry reached the lake shore, both he and Sirius were exhausted, injured, and surrounded by Dementors. The Dementors that night were not a handful of prison guards. Rowling describes them gathering in enormous numbers. They glided toward the lake from every direction, drawn by suffering and weakness. Harry attempted to cast a Patronus charm. The spell failed. Again he tried. Again the silver mist dissolved. Sirius lay nearby, barely conscious. The air grew colder. Harry heard screams echoing from distant memories. His mother's final moments resurfaced through the Dementor's influence. Defeat seemed unavoidable. Then Harry saw a figure across the water. Through the darkness and swirling mist, a powerful Patronus erupted into existence. A shining stag charged forward and drove the Dementors away. The silver creature was enormous, radiant enough to illuminate the shoreline. Harry immediately reached a conclusion. The stag matched the animagus form of his father, James Potter. Throughout the series, Harry desperately seeks connections to the parents he lost as a baby. Standing at the edge of consciousness, watching a stag Patronus defend him, he became convinced that James had somehow returned. That belief is understandable. Harry had already learned from Remus Lupin and Sirius Black that James's animagus form was a stag known as Prongs. He had seen photographs. He had heard stories. The shape of the Patronus matched the image he carried in his mind. More importantly, Harry wanted it to be true. The desire was deeply human. For a brief moment, he believed his father was watching over him from beyond death. The hope was powerful enough that he waited for James to step forward from the darkness. No one came. Hours later, after using the time turner, Harry found himself standing on the opposite side of the lake, watching the same scene unfold from a new perspective. Sirius lay on the ground. Hundreds of Dementors converged once again. Harry knew exactly what was about to happen. He remembered seeing the stag. He remembered believing his father had appeared. Convinced the figure would arrive again, he waited. He watched the shoreline. He searched the darkness, and nothing happened. The realization arrived slowly. No hidden wizard was approaching. No miracle rescue was coming. No parent lost to Voldemort was about to emerge from the shadows. The person Harry had seen earlier was not James Potter. It was Harry Potter himself. At that moment, he understood something crucial. He knew the Patronus would appear because he had already seen it appear. He knew it would succeed because he was alive to remember witnessing it. Drawing strength from that certainty, he stepped forward and cast the spell. The Patronus charm, Expecto Patronum, has always occupied a special place in Harry Potter lore. Unlike many spells, it cannot be fueled by technical skill alone. The caster must focus on a powerful positive memory. During Harry's lessons with Remus Lupin in the 1993 to 1994 school year, he struggled repeatedly against Dementors. Success required emotional resilience. By the lake, however, Harry possessed something even stronger than a memory. He possessed knowledge. He knew that the Patronus had already been cast, because he had already seen its effects. That certainty gave him the confidence he had lacked earlier. The stag that burst from Harry's wand that night was extraordinary. Rowling describes it crossing the lake and scattering the Dementors with overwhelming force. It moved like a living creature, antlers gleaming in silver light. Harry had produced Patronuses before, but never at this scale. The achievement reflected both his magical talent and the unusual circumstances surrounding the event. Time itself seemed to reinforce his conviction. He was not hoping the spell would work. He knew it would. From his perspective, success had already happened. And here, the mystery becomes fascinating. Harry cast the Patronus because he remembered seeing the Patronus, yet he only saw the Patronus because he eventually cast it. Cause and effect circle one another without any obvious beginning. The event has no clear origin point. Philosophers sometimes describe such phenomena as causal loops, situations where information exists because it is passed backward through time rather than created in a conventional way. Harry's confidence comes from witnessing the spell. The spell exists because of that confidence. The loop closes perfectly. This is one of the rare moments in the series where time travel creates something genuinely unsettling beneath the adventure. Most mysteries eventually reveal a starting point. A wand is crafted by a wand maker. A prophecy is spoken by a seer. A map is drawn by its creators. The stag Patronus appears different. The knowledge required to cast it seems suspended inside the loop itself. There is no earlier version of the event outside the timeline. It simply exists as part of a self-contained sequence. Readers have proposed numerous interpretations over the years. Some view the scene as evidence that fate operates within the wizarding world. Others argue that free will remains intact because Harry still chooses to act. A few fan theories suggest that time magic itself subtly guides events toward consistency, ensuring that paradoxes never form. Rowling never offers a definitive answer. Instead, she leaves the mystery intact. The emotional truth of the scene matters most to Harry. He spends years longing for his father only to discover that the strength he sought was already within himself. The lake eventually grows quiet. The Dementors retreat. Sirius survives. Buckbeak waits in the darkness nearby. Yet the question lingers long after the danger passes. If a single night of carefully controlled time travel can create a loop with no obvious beginning, what happens when witches and wizards push temporal magic further than Hermione's 3-hour journey? The Ministry's warnings suddenly feel much more serious. Somewhere in the records of the Department of Mysteries are stories of witches and wizards who venture deeper into time than Harry ever did. And according to those records, not all of them found their way back unchanged. How many disasters occurred before the Ministry of Magic finally decided that time travel needed strict limits? The question rarely appears in conversations about Harry Potter because readers naturally focus on Hermione's successful use of a time turner. Her story is exciting, clever, and ultimately triumphant. Yet the Ministry's extensive regulations did not emerge because everything had gone smoothly. Rules of that severity are usually written in response to failures. Somewhere behind Hermione's carefully managed experience lies a long history of accidents, mistakes, and consequences that most witches and wizards never heard about. The clearest information comes from Rowling's later writings about time travel in the wizarding world. There she explains that the Ministry had spent centuries confronting the dangers associated with temporal magic. Long before Harry Potter attended Hogwarts, witches and wizards attempted to use time travel for personal advantage. Some hoped to correct mistakes, others wanted to alter outcomes that brought them grief. A few simply sought knowledge. Again and again, these efforts produced results far more destructive than anticipated. One of the most chilling details concerns witches and wizards who travel too far into the past. According to Ministry records referenced by Rowling, several individuals became trapped outside their original timeline. Others vanished completely. In some cases, magical travelers encountered alternate versions of themselves, creating instability that proved impossible to control. These accounts survive only as fragments. The books never provide names, dates, or complete narratives. Yet the fact that such incidents were serious enough to influence Ministry policy suggests that temporal disasters were not isolated curiosities. They were recurring problems. A particularly unsettling category involved physical aging. Time is not merely a location through which people move, it acts directly upon the body. When magical experiments interfered with that process, witches and wizards sometimes experienced dramatic consequences. Rowling mentions cases in which travelers aged rapidly. Imagine a young wizard stepping through a temporal experiment and emerging decades older than before. The body obeys time even when the mind struggles to understand what has happened. Such possibilities transform time travel from an academic puzzle into something deeply personal and frightening. These dangers help explain one of the Ministry's most important restrictions. Ordinary time turners permitted only limited travel, usually a few hours. The rule seems conservative until one considers the alternative. Every additional hour increased complexity. Every interaction with the past created opportunities for paradox, confusion, or unintended consequences. Hermione Granger traveled backward repeatedly during her third year, but always within narrow boundaries. Even then, she followed strict instructions and nearly exhausted herself maintaining secrecy. The Ministry's limitations were not signs of caution alone. They reflected hard-earned experience. The language used by Professor McGonagall when discussing Hermione's time turner gains new significance in this context. She does not treat the device as a harmless educational tool. She emphasizes responsibility. She stresses secrecy. She expects complete compliance with the rules. Her attitude mirrors the Ministry's broader approach. Time travel is presented not as an exciting privilege, but as a controlled risk. The adults surrounding Hermione understand dangers she does not yet fully appreciate. Their confidence in her character matters because character may be the only safeguard against catastrophe. One mystery emerges repeatedly when examining these warnings. If time travel is truly so dangerous, why did the Ministry continue studying it at all? The answer may lie in the nature of magical governments themselves. Throughout wizarding history, officials rarely abandon powerful forms of magic simply because they are risky. Instead, they regulate them. Dragons remain protected despite obvious dangers. Powerful artifacts are stored rather than destroyed. The Department of Mysteries continued investigating death, prophecy, and thought. Despite profound uncertainties, time appears to have occupied the same category. Too valuable to ignore, too dangerous to use freely. The unspeakables likely played a central role in managing this balance. Unlike ordinary ministry employees, they devoted entire careers to understanding forces most people never encountered. During the Battle of the Department of Mysteries in June 1996, readers witness only a tiny glimpse of their work. We see shelves of time turners, we see the bell jar, we hear the clocks. Yet these visible objects almost certainly represent the surface of a much larger body of research. Hidden behind locked doors may have been records describing every known temporal accident in magical history. A popular theory among readers suggests that many of those records were intentionally concealed from the public. The theory remains speculation, but it fits the behavior of the ministry throughout the series. Officials often limit access to information they consider dangerous. Consider the secrecy surrounding prophecies. Consider the restricted knowledge of Horcruxes. Consider how few people understand the true nature of the veil in the death chamber. Time magic follows the same pattern. Knowledge itself may have been viewed as a hazard. The fewer people understood temporal manipulation, the fewer would attempt it. The Battle of the Department of Mysteries inadvertently demonstrated how unstable time magic could be under pressure. When spells struck the shelves containing time turners, catastrophic reactions followed. Glass shattered, magical energy erupted, objects and people became caught in bizarre temporal effects. During the chaos, one Death Eater was briefly subjected to rapid age changes, a moment that echoes the bell jar's endless cycle of growth and decay. The incident lasted only seconds, yet it provided a glimpse into forces normally kept under careful control. Even damaged artifacts retained tremendous power. What makes these stories so unsettling is their incompleteness. We know disasters occurred, but we rarely learn who suffered them. We hear warnings, but not the full histories behind those warnings. The gaps create an impression of forgotten tragedies scattered throughout centuries of wizarding life. Somewhere long before Harry's birth, a witch may have attempted to undo a personal loss and vanished forever. Somewhere, an ambitious wizard may have pushed beyond the ministry's limits and discovered why those limits existed. The records remain hidden, but the consequences left enough scars to shape policy for generations. As the evidence accumulates, a pattern emerges. Time magic behaves differently from ordinary spellcraft. A failed levitation charm drops an object. A failed potion may explode. Time travel threatens something deeper. It interferes with the structure through which all events unfold. The ministry's fear begins to feel justified. Yet even after acknowledging every warning, another mystery remains unresolved. Beneath the ticking clocks of the time room stood the bell jar, endlessly aging and renewing, a living creature. It was not a cautionary tale. It was an experiment. And that raises a troubling possibility. Perhaps the unspeakables were not merely protecting the wizarding world from time. Perhaps they were still trying to understand what time actually was. Was the bell jar in the Department of Mysteries merely an experiment? Or was it evidence that time itself could be treated like a physical force? The question returns us to one of the most haunting images in the entire Harry Potter series. Readers spend far more time discussing time turners than they do discussing the crystal bell jar suspended in the time room. Yet the bell jar may be the more profound mystery. A time turner moves a wizard through time. The bell jar appears to manipulate time itself. That distinction changes everything. When Harry Potter entered the time room during the Battle of the Department of Mysteries in June 1996, he immediately noticed the strange object hanging in the center of the chamber. Within the transparent glass, a tiny hummingbird moved through an endless cycle. The creature hatched from an egg, matured into adulthood, aged visibly, weakened, and died. Then the process reversed. The dead bird became young again. The adult returned to infancy. The infant returned to the egg. Moments later, the cycle began anew. Rowling presents the phenomenon almost casually amid the surrounding chaos, yet its implications are enormous. Unlike a time turner, the bell jar does not appear to transport its subject into the past. The hummingbird remains in the same physical location. Instead, time flows differently within the jar than outside it. The bird experiences years, while only moments pass for observers. Then those years collapse backward. Life and death become temporary conditions rather than permanent destinations. If such an effect can be sustained inside a controlled environment, it suggests that time in the wizarding world behaves less like a straight line and more like a substance that can be manipulated under specific conditions. The image becomes even more intriguing when placed beside other magical phenomena in the series. Consider the pensive. Memories can be removed from the mind and stored in a silver basin. Consider portraits, which preserve fragments of personality after death. Consider the resurrection stone, which allows brief communication with echoes of the departed. Again and again, Rowling presents abstract concepts as tangible magical realities. Memory can be extracted. Thought can be examined. Love is studied within the Department of Mysteries. Time appears to belong to the same category. It is not merely measured. It can be acted upon. The bell jar's location inside the Department of Mysteries is equally significant. The room does not stand alone. Nearby are chambers devoted to prophecy, death, and the human mind. These are not random subjects. They represent some of the deepest questions facing both wizards and muggles. Why do people die? Can the future be known? What is consciousness? By placing time among these mysteries, Rowling elevates it beyond ordinary magic. The unspeakables were not researching convenient transportation or academic scheduling. They were investigating one of the fundamental structures of existence. One of the most revealing moments occurs during the battle itself. Spells ricochet through the chamber as Harry and his friends flee from Death Eaters. Magical equipment is damaged. Shelves collapse. Temporal forces begin behaving unpredictably. At one point, a Death Eater is affected by unusual aging effects connected to the room's magic. The scene unfolds quickly, but it demonstrates something important. The bell jar is not an isolated curiosity. The entire room appears saturated with temporal energy. Disturbing one part of the environment can produce consequences elsewhere. This raises a fascinating possibility. Perhaps the clocks lining the walls were not simply decorative instruments. Harry observes hundreds of them all ticking simultaneously. Some are large, others small. Some move rapidly while others seem slower. The books never explain their purpose. Many readers assume they are merely thematic details, reinforcing the room's connection to time. Yet within the logic of magical research, such an explanation feels incomplete, Laboratories contain equipment because equipment serves a function. The clocks may have been measuring subtle temporal fluctuations invisible to ordinary observers. A popular fan theory suggests that the bell jar represented a controlled temporal field created by the unspeakables. According to this idea, researchers learned how to isolate a small region of altered time while preventing the effect from spreading beyond the glass boundary. The theory remains unconfirmed, but it fits what readers actually witness. The hummingbird undergoes dramatic changes while everything outside the jar remains stable. Such containment would have been essential. Unrestricted temporal distortions inside the ministry could have produced catastrophic consequences throughout the building. The relationship between time and aging becomes especially interesting here. Throughout the series, age generally progresses in a predictable manner. Harry grows from 11 to 17. Dumbledore advances through old age. Nicholas Flamel survives centuries through the Philosopher's Stone, yet the bell jar reveals that aging itself may simply be one visible effect of time's movement. Slow time and aging slows. Reverse time and aging reverses. Accelerate time, and entire lifetimes unfold within minutes. The hummingbird serves as a living demonstration of that principle. This idea echoes another remarkable moment from wizarding history. Nicholas and Perenelle Flamel extended their lives through the Philosopher's Stone, an artifact capable of producing the elixir of life. The stone does not directly manipulate time, yet both subjects touch the same mystery. How can mortality be delayed or altered? The unspeakables may have approached that question from a different angle. Rather than creating immortality, they may have been investigating the mechanisms through which life and time remain connected. The bell jar's endless cycle resembles a scientific experiment probing the boundary between existence and extinction. Dumbledore once remarked that understanding death was among the greatest challenges facing wizard kind. The Department of Mysteries seems to agree. The death chamber contains the veil. The time room contains the bell jar. One studies what happens when life ends. The other studies how life changes across time. Their proximity feels intentional. It is difficult to believe the unspeakables viewed these questions as separate. Time carries living beings toward death. Death defines the limits of a lifespan. Together they form a single puzzle examined from different directions. And yet, after centuries of research, no final answers appear. The bell jar remains unexplained. The clocks continue ticking. The unspeakables continue working behind closed doors. Readers are left with fragments rather than conclusions. Perhaps that uncertainty is the point. The Department of Mysteries does not exist to provide solutions. It exists to remind us that some forces remain larger than any wizard's understanding. But if time magic was truly so mysterious and so dangerous, then another question naturally follows. When the Battle of the Department of Mysteries shattered shelves of time turners in 1996, did the wizarding world really lose every one of them? Or were some secrets considered too valuable to disappear forever? Did the wizarding world truly lose every time turner during the Battle of the Department of Mysteries? Or were some hidden away beyond the reach of destruction? The official story appears straightforward. In June of 1996, Harry Potter and his friends fought Death Eaters inside the Ministry. During the battle, shelves containing time turners were smashed. The devices fell, shattered, and unleashed dangerous magical effects. Later accounts treated the destruction as comprehensive, yet the more closely one examines the circumstances, the more intriguing questions begin to emerge. After all, the ministry was protecting some of the most valuable magical artifacts in Britain. The destruction occurred during one of the most chaotic confrontations of the Second Wizarding War. Harry, Hermione, Ron, Ginny, Neville, and Luna had entered the Department of Mysteries believing they were attempting to rescue Sirius Black. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a carefully arranged ambush orchestrated by Lord Voldemort. Lucius Malfoy and a group of Death Eaters pursued them through the circular chambers. Spells erupted in every direction. Glass shattered, doors swung open and closed. Precious magical objects that had likely survived for decades or even centuries were suddenly caught in open combat. The Time Room suffered particularly severe damage. Rowling describes shelves lined with time turners, each resting inside protective glass. During the fighting, these shelves collapsed. Delicate hourglasses struck the floor and broke apart. The destruction was not merely physical. Temporal energy escaped. The room responded violently. For a brief moment, readers witness what happens when carefully regulated time magic loses its containment. The results are unpredictable enough to alarm even experienced Death Eaters. One reason the official account seems plausible is the relatively small number of time turners known to exist. Hermione's device had already been presented as something highly restricted. The ministry did not distribute them casually. Each required authorization and oversight. If the Department of Mysteries housed the nation's primary collection, then the loss would indeed have been devastating. Rowling later confirmed that the destruction served an important narrative purpose. Time travel created complications for future stories, and removing most time turners prevented readers from asking why characters did not simply use them to solve every major crisis. Yet explanations outside the story do not fully erase questions inside the story. The Ministry of Magic is a sprawling institution. It maintains records, archives, evidence vaults, and secure storage facilities. Magical governments rarely keep all valuable assets in one location. Consider the treatment of prophecies. Hundreds were stored together in the Hall of Prophecy, but only because they belonged to a specific branch of magical research. It is reasonable to wonder whether other temporal artifacts existed elsewhere. The books never explicitly say they did. They also never explicitly say they did not. The behavior of the unspeakables adds another layer to the mystery. Throughout the series, they are portrayed as intensely secretive. Even Arthur Weasley, a long-serving ministry employee, possesses little detailed knowledge of their work. If the Department of Mysteries concealed information from ordinary officials, it is difficult to imagine them placing every temporal discovery on publicly accessible shelves. Researchers who spent generations studying time would likely recognize the risk of losing everything in a single accident. Whether that precaution existed remains unknown, but the possibility lingers. There is also the question of research continuity. The Department of Mysteries did not cease to exist after the battle. Unspeakables continued their work. The ministry continued functioning. The war intensified, but magical research endured. If all practical knowledge of temporal magic had been destroyed alongside the time turners, the loss would have represented a profound setback. Yet the wizarding world appears surprisingly resilient afterward. This suggests that information survived even if many devices did not. Knowledge and artifacts are not always the same thing. A popular fan theory proposes that the destroyed time turners represented only standard ministry models. According to this interpretation, more advanced forms of temporal magic remained secured elsewhere, accessible only to a handful of specialists. The theory gains attention because of later developments involving time travel, though it remains unconfirmed within the original 7 novels. Supporters point out that the Department of Mysteries devoted centuries to studying time. It seems unlikely, they argue, that every meaningful breakthrough would be displayed on a single set of shelves, vulnerable to destruction during one battle. Another detail worth considering is the sheer rarity of magical inventions. The wizarding world preserves powerful artifacts for extraordinary lengths of time. The Sword of Gryffindor survives for centuries. The Deathly Hallows pass through generations. Ancient magical objects routinely outlast their creators. Against that backdrop, the complete disappearance of every time turner feels unusual, not impossible certainly, but unusual. Magical history tends to leave remnants behind, hidden in vaults, forgotten in collections, or preserved by cautious custodians. The destruction of the time turners also carries symbolic significance. Throughout Harry Potter, the temptation to control events appears repeatedly. Voldemort seeks immortality through Horcruxes. Cornelius Fudge attempts to control political narratives. Even well-intentioned characters occasionally wish they could undo mistakes. Time turners embody that temptation in physical form. They offer the possibility of revisiting the past, correcting errors, and escaping consequences. Their destruction marks a turning point. As the Second Wizarding War grows darker, the story becomes increasingly focused on choices that cannot be undone. Albus Dumbledore understood this better than anyone. Throughout the series, he consistently emphasizes acceptance over control. He warns against obsession with the past. He advises Harry to focus on the choices before him, rather than impossible alternatives. In that light, the loss of the time turners feels almost thematic. The wizarding world cannot solve its problems by rewriting history. It must confront them directly. Voldemort cannot be defeated by traveling backward. The future must be shaped through courage, sacrifice, and action in the present. Yet mysteries rarely disappear simply because official explanations exist. The shattered glass of the time room settled long ago. The battle ended. Voldemort eventually fell. Even so, readers continue asking whether some fragment of temporal knowledge survived beyond those broken shelves. The question becomes even more compelling when another story enters the picture. Years after Harry's victory, a different time turner appears, one capable of doing things the original devices seemingly could not. Its existence opens a new chapter in the mystery of time magic and forces us to reconsider everything we thought we understood about the rules governing the past. Are there actually 2 different forms of time magic in the wizarding world? Or does a later discovery reveal that the original understanding of time travel was incomplete? Few subjects generate more debate among Harry Potter readers than the relationship between the time turner in Prisoner of Azkaban and the one that appears years later in Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. The two seem similar at first glance. Both are magical devices associated with travel through time. Both place young protagonists at the center of temporal adventures. Yet the deeper one looks, the more dramatically their behavior diverges. What once appeared to be a single branch of magic begins to look like something far more complicated. The story of the cursed child takes place many years after the Battle of Hogwarts. Harry Potter is now an adult working at the Ministry of Magic. His son, Albus Severus Potter, attends Hogwarts alongside Scorpius Malfoy, the son of Draco Malfoy. Unlike Harry's friendship with Ron and Hermione, the bond between Albus and Scorpius develops under the shadow of family expectations and public scrutiny. Both boys struggle with the weight of famous surnames. Their desire to prove themselves eventually draws them into one of the most dangerous magical adventures of the post-war era. At the center of that adventure stands a remarkable object. This time turner is not the standard ministry model used by Hermione Granger. Instead, it is presented as a far more advanced creation associated with Theodore Nott, the former Slytherin student who belonged to Harry's generation. Theodore's father, Nott, had been a Death Eater loyal to Lord Voldemort. After the war, Theodore allegedly devoted himself to creating a time turner capable of overcoming the limitations that constrained earlier versions. Whether viewed as brilliance or recklessness, the achievement represents a major leap beyond the devices stored in the Department of Mysteries. The difference becomes apparent almost immediately. Hermione's time turner allowed travel only a few hours into the past. The device in the cursed child permits journeys much farther backward. Albus and Scorpius use it to reach moments connected to the Triwizard Tournament of 1994 to 1995. They witness events involving Cedric Diggory, Victor Krum, Fleur Delacour, and Harry Potter himself during his 4th year at Hogwarts. Suddenly, temporal travel is no longer confined to short loops. Entire decades become accessible. This shift creates the central controversy. In Prisoner of Azkaban, time travel operates according to a closed-loop model. Harry and Hermione do not change history, they fulfill it. Everything they do was already part of the timeline from the beginning. In The Cursed Child, however, interventions produce dramatic alterations. Small actions during the Triwizard Tournament generate radically different futures. In one timeline, Cedric Diggory survives. In another, the wizarding world falls under the domination of Voldemort. Reality itself appears flexible in ways the earlier books never suggested. The Cedric Diggory storyline sits at the center of these changes. In canon, Cedric dies in the graveyard of Little Hangleton on June 24th, 1995, after being transported there by the Triwizard Cup, which had been transformed into a port key. His death marks one of the most significant turning points in the series. It signals Voldemort's return to physical form and the end of Harry's relatively sheltered childhood. Albus and Scorpius believe they can prevent this tragedy. Their attempts to save Cedric trigger consequences neither of them anticipates. One altered timeline proves especially disturbing. In this version of events, Cedric survives but follows a darker path than anyone expected. Humiliated during the tournament, he becomes vulnerable to influences that eventually align him with Voldemort's cause. This chain of events contributes to a future in which Voldemort triumphs during the Battle of Hogwarts, Dolores Umbridge gains greater authority. Severus Snape continues operating within a resistance movement. Familiar lives unfold along entirely different trajectories. The world itself seems rewritten. These alternate realities raise profound questions about the nature of time. If the original time turners operated within a fixed timeline, why does this new device produce branching outcomes? One possibility is technological advancement. Theodore Nott may have created something fundamentally different from earlier time turners. Another possibility is that the Ministry never fully understood temporal magic in the first place. The closed-loop model may describe only one aspect of a much larger system. Just as early astronomers understood only part of the cosmos, early temporal researchers may have grasped only part of time. Many readers attempt to reconcile the two models rather than choosing between them. One popular theory suggests that ordinary time turners function within stable loops because their range is deliberately limited. Travel a few hours into the past, and events remain self-consistent. Travel years into the past, however, and entirely different rules begin to apply. According to this interpretation, Hermione never encountered alternate timelines because her journeys were too small to generate them. Albus and Scorpius crossed thresholds earlier travelers never reached. Another theory focuses on the exceptional nature of Theodore Nott's invention. The device described in The Cursed Child is not merely a surviving Ministry artifact. It is portrayed as an extraordinary creation capable of feats beyond previous technology. If that interpretation is correct, then the apparent contradiction disappears. The wizarding world possesses multiple forms of temporal magic, each operating according to different principles. One preserves a fixed timeline, another allows alterations. The distinction resembles the difference between an ordinary broomstick and a highly specialized magical artifact. Both fly, but not in the same way. Regardless of which interpretation one prefers, The Cursed Child accomplishes something important. It reminds readers that time remains mysterious even after centuries of study. The Department of Mysteries never claimed complete understanding. The Unspeakables never published a definitive theory explaining every temporal phenomenon. New discoveries continue emerging. New dangers continue appearing. Every answer seems to generate additional questions. The wizarding world remains as uncertain about time as ever. And that uncertainty leads naturally toward the final mystery. The Ministry studied time for generations. The Unspeakables filled entire chambers with clocks, time turners, and experiments. Dumbledore understood enough to guide Harry through a temporal loop. Theodore Nott created a device capable of reaching decades into the past. Yet despite all this knowledge, the deepest questions remain unresolved. After centuries of research, why do even the greatest magical minds seem to understand so little about the Force they have spent so long trying to master? After centuries of research, why do even the most brilliant magical minds appear to understand so little about time itself? It is a remarkable question when you consider the people involved. Albus Dumbledore mastered branches of magic that few others could comprehend. Nicholas Flamel prolonged life for centuries through the Philosopher's Stone. The Unspeakables dedicated entire careers to investigating the deepest forces in existence, yet none of them left behind a complete explanation of time. The wizarding world possesses artifacts that manipulate it, rooms devoted to studying it, and records documenting its dangers. But certainty remains elusive. The deeper the investigation goes, the more mysterious the subject becomes. Part of the answer may lie in the company time keeps within the Department of Mysteries. The time room does not stand alone. Nearby lies the Hall of Prophecy, where shelves contain glass spheres recording predictions of future events. Elsewhere stands the Death Chamber, dominated by the ancient stone archway known as the Veil. Another chamber concerns thought itself. The Ministry grouped these subjects together for a reason. They all occupy the boundary between what can be observed and what can only be partially understood. Time, prophecy, consciousness, and death seem less like separate mysteries than different faces of the same puzzle. Consider prophecy. Sybil Trelawney's prediction concerning Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort influenced countless events across 2 wizarding wars. Yet even Dumbledore admitted that prophecies do not force people to act. Voldemort chose to pursue Harry. Harry chose to confront Voldemort. The future appeared visible in fragments, but human choice remained significant. Time presents a similar paradox. Harry's rescue of Sirius Black seems fixed within a closed loop, yet Harry still experiences the event as a personal decision. The wizarding world repeatedly suggests that destiny and free will coexist in ways no one fully understands. The Veil introduces another layer of uncertainty. During the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, Sirius Black fell through the ancient archway after being struck by Bellatrix Lestrange's curse. Harry watched him disappear beyond the tattered curtain and never return. The exact nature of the Veil remains unexplained. Rowling has described it as a boundary between life and death, but the mechanics are never fully revealed. What matters here is its location. The Veil stands only a short distance from the Time Room. The Ministry's researchers apparently believed that death and time belonged within the same broader field of inquiry. This connection becomes more intriguing when viewed through Dumbledore's philosophy. Throughout the series, he repeatedly argues that the desire to dominate death leads people toward dangerous choices. Voldemort creates Horcruxes. Gellert Grindelwald seeks the Deathly Hallows. Countless witches and wizards chase forms of power promising control over mortality. Time travel tempts people in a similar way. If one could revisit the past indefinitely, perhaps one could undo every loss. If one could reach any moment, perhaps death itself would lose meaning. Yet the stories surrounding temporal magic consistently warn against such thinking. Harry's own experiences reinforce this lesson. Despite possessing access to a time-turner in Prisoner of Azkaban, he never uses it to save his parents. He never attempts to prevent Voldemort's attack in Godric's Hollow. He never tries to rewrite every tragedy that shaped his life. The opportunity never truly exists because the rules of time resist that kind of intervention. The narrative repeatedly closes those doors. Harry learns to move forward rather than backward. In many ways, that lesson becomes one of the central themes of the entire series. The Department of Mysteries itself reflects this tension between knowledge and humility. The name sounds paradoxical at first. Most institutions exist to eliminate mysteries. This one preserves them. The unspeakables investigate questions that remain unanswered, even after generations of study. Their work continues, not because they possess certainty, but because certainty remains beyond reach. The ticking clocks in the time room symbolize that reality perfectly. Each clock measures something precisely, yet together they surround a mystery no instrument can fully solve. Popular fan theory suggests that the unspeakables eventually realize time cannot be mastered because it is woven into every other magical force. According to this interpretation, prophecy functions through time. Memory preserves pieces of time. Death marks the end of a person's time. Even the Patronus charm often draws strength from memories anchored in specific moments. The theory remains speculative, but it captures something important about Rowling's world. Time rarely appears in isolation. It touches every corner of magical life. The surviving evidence supports at least one conclusion. Time magic is not merely another subject alongside charms, potions, or transfiguration. Hogwarts teaches those disciplines openly. Students can master them through practice and study. Time remains different. It occupies the same category as the deepest mysteries of existence. Wizards learn enough to interact with it. They never learn enough to control it completely. Every major encounter with temporal magic, from Hermione's time turner to the bell jar's hummingbird, reinforces that distinction. Perhaps that is why the Department of Mysteries feels so unforgettable. Readers enter expecting secret knowledge and leave with even larger questions. We see a bird aging and being reborn inside a crystal bell jar. We watch Harry cast a Patronus because he already remembers seeing himself cast it. We hear of vanished travelers, destroyed time turners, and experiments conducted behind locked doors. Each revelation illuminates a small area while leaving the surrounding darkness untouched. The mystery survives every attempt to explain it. And so, as our journey through time magic comes to an end, we return to the place where it began. Deep beneath London, beyond the ministry offices and hidden corridors, the time room waits in silence. The battle that once shattered its shelves is long over. Harry Potter has grown older. Voldemort has fallen. Generations of unspeakables have come and gone. Yet the clocks continue their endless work. Their hands glide forward through the darkness. Their ticking echoes softly between the walls. Somewhere beneath the glass of a suspended bell jar, a tiny creature grows old, dies, and is born again, while time itself keeps its oldest secrets. When you step back from all the clocks, time turners, prophecies, and impossible loops, a quiet pattern begins to emerge. Time magic in Harry Potter is never really about time. It is about the human desire to escape the weight of loss. Voldemort tries to outrun death through Horcruxes. The creators of the Philosopher's Stone seek longer life. Albus and Scorpius reach into the past, hoping to rescue Cedric Diggory. Even Harry, standing beside the lake, longs for one impossible glimpse of his father. Again and again, the wizarding world asks the same question in different forms. If you possessed enough power, could you undo what hurts? Rowling's answer is gentler than it first appears. The answer is not that the past is unimportant. Memory matters enormously in this world. Harry survives because he remembers love. Patronuses are powered by memory. The mirror of Arist reveals memories transformed into desire. The Resurrection Stone offers the comfort of remembered voices. Yet memory and control are not the same thing. The books repeatedly honor the past while warning against becoming trapped inside it. Time magic sits at the center of that lesson because it offers the ultimate temptation, not merely remembering yesterday, but returning to it. That is why the most successful use of time travel in the series does not actually change history. Harry and Hermione save Sirius Black and Buckbeak because they were always meant to save them. The timeline remains whole. No reality is rewritten. No tragedy is erased from existence. Instead, they discover that courage still matters even when events seem predetermined. Harry casts the Patronus not because time gives him power, but because he finally recognizes the strength that was already his. The magic works because he acts. The loop may be mysterious, but the choice remains real. The Department of Mysteries reflects this truth in its architecture. Time stands beside death. Prophecy stands beside thought. These are not problems waiting for a clever wizard to solve. They are conditions of existence. The unspeakables study them because they shape every life, not because they expect final answers. The clocks in the time room do not count down toward a revelation. They simply continue ticking. Their purpose is almost monastic. They remind every visitor that understanding and mastery are different things. Perhaps that is why Dumbledore feels so closely connected to this subject, despite rarely discussing it directly. More than any other character, he learns that wisdom is not the same as control. He cannot save Ariana. He cannot prevent every death in the coming war. He cannot erase his own mistakes. What he can do is choose how to respond to them. That lesson echoes through the entire series. The future remains uncertain. The past remains fixed. Between them stands the present moment where every meaningful choice is made. And so, as the story settles into silence, you find yourself once again beneath the Ministry of Magic. The corridors are empty now. The battle has faded into history. The unspeakables have returned to their hidden work. In the darkness of the time room, hundreds of clocks continue their patient conversation with eternity. A crystal bell jar hangs motionless in the air. Inside it, a tiny hummingbird grows old, dies, and is born again. Around it, the shadows remain undisturbed, and the soft ticking goes on through the night, as though time itself has been waiting there all along.